One person's addiction might be drugs and alcohol, and the other person's addiction is success and achievement. I believe that many people in their careers and in their strive for success are driven by that desire, that need, that want to be enough and to be likable. The truth is, I think, and this might be slightly controversial, we don't have a society that's built around nurturing children. I don't know if we ever did, but we certainly don't now.
You're probably really good at your job and you're probably exhausted. The job might be hard, but you can handle hard. But somewhere along the way, you ended up carrying things that aren't actually yours to carry. Other people's stress, other people's emotions, and the gap between what the system provides and what the patients need. And you step into it every time without even thinking about it. You just do it. And here's the thing that nobody tells you. This pattern, this is the one that makes you so good at what you do. But it actually has more in common with patterns of addiction than most of us would feel comfortable admitting. Not because there's anything wrong with you, but because for some people, the drive to be needed, to be enough, to never let anyone down, runs so deep that no amount of doing more ever quite satisfies it. And medicine and healthcare is the perfect place to feed this pattern. Josh Connolly, today's guest, has lived this from both sides. He's a resilience coach and author of It's Them, Not You. And what he said in this conversation really stopped me, because it turns out the reason why stepping back feels so impossible is because it probably didn't start at work. So by the end of this episode, you'll understand exactly why you keep ending up carrying more than your share and why it's so hard to stop even when you can see it happening. You'll also have a way of thinking about it that makes the first step out of it genuinely possible. It's not a big overhaul. It's not another thing on your to-do list. It's just a really small thing that can start on your way home tonight. I'm Dr. Rachel Morris, and this is You Are Not a Frog.
Hello, I am Josh Connolly. I'm the author of the book It's Them, Not You, How to Break Free from Toxic Parents and Reclaim Your Story. And alongside that, I build and create communities for people to come together and rediscover who they were always meant to be.
It's really wonderful to have you on the podcast, Josh. We've got a lot to talk about. Your book is really, really fascinating to me. And I think it works for people, whether they do have toxic parents, whether they don't have toxic parents. I think all of us in our childhood have got things that weren't ideal and roles that we went into. But one of the themes that's very strong is about people pleasing and emotional self-abandonment as survival mechanisms. And I'm very interested in how this shows up and what this looks like in high-achieving people like doctors and other healthcare professionals, and in really high-stress jobs that outwardly seem very, very successful and capable. Does it show up in them?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And, one of the things that I always say is that a high-achieving person that works in any role, like a doctor, or whether it's in the corporate world, you could bring one of these people and they could walk past somebody who might be living on the streets, trapped in addiction, and they might walk past that person and think we have absolutely nothing in common. We're like so far away from each other. It's unbelievable. But if you really break it down, in many cases, they could be suffering from very, very similar things. It's just that one person's addiction might be drugs and alcohol, and the other person's addiction is success and achievement, and striving towards that next rung on the ladder with the belief that maybe if I reach that next rung, maybe if I achieve that next goal, then maybe that will be the thing that finally makes me feel like I'm enough, like I'm lovable. And it's like a very subconscious thing. But I believe that many people in their careers and in their strive for success are driven by that desire, that need, that want to be enough and to be likable and to be lovable. And I think when people talk about things like burnout and stuff like that, we often talk about work environment and structures that we exist in, and all of those things play a role. But I think actually sometimes people are so driven by that need to be enough that nothing is ever going to work because you're chasing the wrong thing. So it's almost in that way a bit like an addiction. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, that's quite shocking, really, but it really does make sense. How can you tell, though, if your desire for success and achievement is driven by the same things that would drive someone to addiction or as a healthy behavior?
I think it's the impact that it has on your day-to-day life. So if we take, for example, let's say a family person who may have a partner at home and may have children at home, and yet we talk about success. So you'd like to be successful in every aspect of your life. So you might want to be a successful wife or a successful husband, as well as a successful father or mother. But if work takes precedent over all of those things, irrespective, and starts to have negative impacts in the long run, then that can start to point towards you chasing something else. So when it really impacts and affects your rationale in every other aspect of your life, then it's problematic. And again, to like oversimplify and bring a maybe like a simple example that is oversimplified just to highlight a point, we might look at somebody who has a problem with alcohol, who maybe's lost everything, lost their family, lost the people that care about them. And we might look at them and say, why didn't you just stop drinking? But if somebody's lost their family, lost their kids, but has loads of money in the bank and has reached the top of their job, nobody would say, or people rarely say, why didn't you just stop working? You just put it down. And those two examples that I've given could ultimately be feeling exactly the same way. And so it's when we start to abandon the things that really, if we were to sit down and be really honest, really matter, then it's problematic. Now, I know I'm going off a little bit here, but it's worth highlighting. When we are trapped in those kind of addictive cycles, if we're going to call them that, we do get trapped in denial. And the worst thing about pushing away the things that we really do care about is when we're doing it, we will tell ourselves a different story that protects the thing that we're doing. So someone who has a problem with alcohol, and by the way, I'm one of them people, I'm long-term sobriety now, but in the past, I wasn't just thinking, I need drink above everything else. I would have said that it's just really hard to be a dad, or if my wife wasn't like that at home, then maybe I wouldn't be like that. And you'll hear people trapped in addiction to success, for want of a better term, and to keep it simple, they would tell themselves the same thing. If my partner at home didn't just pressure me so much, all of the good things that we've got in our life is because of this. So it becomes very difficult because the stories and the narratives that we create in our mind to protect that thing that we're hyper focused on can make it hard to spot the fact that it is those things.
Yeah, particularly when those things are actually true. So a lot of doctors will say, well, if I don't do it, someone has to. And if I don't do it, patients will be harmed. And you can always extrapolate that, yes, there will be somebody inconvenienced, at least if you're not there to do it. So we can actually start to believe our own stories. But you're saying there will always be a story, right?
Yeah. So there was a doctor, you can go and check this, right? But she was essentially forging appointments at the end of the day so that she could make the school run. And there was a big debate around like the issue that would cause, because it was like people were getting appointments that should have been able to, but the pressure that she was under. So again, this is like one of the issues that you've got, is that there's real life pressures, particularly when we're talking about doctors, right? So there's a system that doesn't adequately support them. And if you're somebody who's that way inclined, yeah, then you can lean into that. And again, like a replica of that, which I think people will find easier to understand, is when I was young and drinking in the way that I did, I slotted myself into sort of party culture, pub culture, and I blended in. I didn't look like somebody with a problem. I just looked like everybody else. And so this environment, you might even be drawn to that environment if you're chasing that, because that system then fits your need. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. And the problem is we're actually rewarded. We're rewarded for conforming to that system, because like, who doesn't want a doctor who's overworking, over responsible, overperforming? So we're told that, yeah, you're an absolutely brilliant person if you're doing that, yet it's at the cost of your family or your relationships. And I think that question, why didn't you just stop drinking, or why didn't you just stop working? It feels impossible in the moment. And then when you're looking back at it and thinking of all those opportunities that you lost or you missed, or the family that you've lost, and that does happen. I hear it all the time of people that have burnt out, but by the time they've actually realized they need to make a change, it's far too late, and they have a fractured relationship, and they've lost the relationship with their children. They haven't got any friends and no hobbies. But we are so driven to keep on going and we blame the system, and we blame the fact that there's always people relying on us. And there always is. And
Yeah.
it's partially true, but what you're saying is that actually the compulsion is much more internal.
Well, I would argue that what you're highlighting, and look, in some ways it's disappointing because I'm not going to give you like a clear answer here. But if you look at society as a whole, right, we've actually got to a stage now where normal, so what we consider the baseline of a quote unquote normal person, is somebody who's highly functioning, able to go to work a lot, do lots of work, and be successful and do well. That is now the baseline in many areas of our life. And so if you fall short of that, we can actually start to frame that as there being an issue. And we're sort of, in many ways, inadvertently fed that as children as well, right? We go to school and we're told from the age of 5 years old, what you do for the next 10 years will define who you are in your life. And you need to be successful. If you want to be successful, you need to do well. You need to be good. You need to do this. And whatever it is within the schooling system, it's sit down, do well in these exams. And so if you're not having your needs met in terms of knowing that your value is innate, knowing that you're lovable as you are, right? So I want my children, I'm a parent myself, I would want all of my children to know that I love them irrespective of what they do and what they achieve. We actually send our children to school from the age of 5 years old, and they're taught and shown different to that. And so if they don't have that baseline of actually, I am enough irrespective of that, you can see how it can be very easy to get lost in that, to get lost in, okay, well, so if I want to be somebody, if I want to be of value, then I have to chase that. And if they don't have, and I actually believe most, and that's not a scientific term, but I actually believe most of us grow up without the realization that we are of value innately. And so we can go chasing something to make us feel of value. And if it happens to be our career, again, the success that comes with that will also be celebrated. So that person that's lost everything, they've lost their family, they're at that stage of complete burnout, maybe collecting awards on a regular basis for their service to their role. So there's so many different aspects that are playing a role in this that we can't even put it on the individual. And actually that's true of all addiction, right? This is a societal issue actually that's deeper than the individual in many ways. Yeah.
So you're talking about the schooling system. Certainly I've got my daughter's doing GCSEs at the moment, and I'm just seeing the pressure that she's under. So it's very strong at school, certainly this sort of success story that you have to be a success to mean anything. Or that's the story that presumably the high functioning professionals subsume. What goes on in families as well? Because you talk about a lot of the dysfunctional roles that children can play within families that push them into being these sort of over responsible people too.
If I give like my own example, and my example is extreme, right? My dad was an alcoholic. He spent time in prison. I experienced lots of like domestic violence and things like that at home. But when I look at the rules of the house that I existed in as a result of that, the rules were that you don't talk and you don't trust and you don't feel, right? And if I look at I don't feel, how that comes about, if I'd had a particularly bad night the night before, right, there was like a lot of stuff going on, my mum the next morning would be frantically acting like everything was okay. She'd be saying, this isn't your fault. I don't want you to worry about this. Then she'd say something like, you're okay, aren't you? And when my mum said, "You're okay, aren't you?" she wasn't seeking to create a space for me to explore my emotions. Emotionally, she was full, and she was looking for me to validate her need for me to be okay. And as a young boy, I sensed and knew that. So I learned to push my emotions down and to not burden my mum with the ways I was feeling. So the subliminal message, and again, that's like a singular example of the way that I lived within that family system. I started to feed the message that in order to be loved, I needed to be pleasing. I needed to not be a burden. And so I can take my extreme example, and then we can start to place that into, if we played devil's advocate, say, and put that into every family home, and we start to question, where might we be making our children believe that their value and their love is dependent upon how they show up? I'll give you an obvious example that I think can happen in every home. When I was with my daughter's mum, when she was younger, she's quite sensitive. So if she would walk into the kitchen and say, I'd just have a bit of a fallout with her mum, like a discussion, like these things happen. My daughter used to walk in and sometimes she'd be able to sense the atmosphere, right? Sense that something had gone on. So she would be like, stop it. Now, if I'm not emotionally available in that moment, and there's many, many times when we're not emotionally available as adults, I might say something like, don't be silly, everything's fine. There's nothing going on. And what I do in that sentence is I tell my daughter not to trust her body, right? And I tell her that to not come to us with it, right? And that we're sweeping that under the carpet. What she would actually need if I was more emotionally available, don't worry. What you're sensing is me and your mum have just had a bit of a discussion. We've disagreed on something. That doesn't mean we love each other any less, right? But it's great that your body's picked up on that, and how powerful that your body can understand that. But I would argue that most of us are so busy in our day-to-day lives, we do the former. So we're constantly giving this messaging to our children, who are always seeking attachment from us. They're always seeking messaging. Am I lovable? What do I need to be? And if we're not emotionally present, and we've built a society that doesn't harbor that at all, we could constantly be telling our children, be more. And so, what we'd often see is the first child, and this is not like strict rules, but the first child might become the high achiever, right? It's look at my perfect child. We must be doing something right. Look how amazing they're doing. The second child may never be able to live up to that. So they might become a bit more like the mascot, which is what I did. Pleasing, funny, makes everybody laugh all of the time. What's the problem for the mascot child? When I'm in the company of somebody who doesn't seem 100% happy, it feels like a character assassination to me. And then you go on and you can have what we often call a scapegoat child, and that person finds their role within the family by acting out, maybe being a little bit naughty at school. And then instead of looking at the fact that dad's always stressed, or that he might have a problem with drink, or that mum is not emotionally available, or whatever it might be, instead of looking at that, we go, this one's the problem. Is this child that's the problem? And again, that child can then continue to play out that role because that's how they fit within that system. And you can see how just those three roles can then go on into our adult life. The high achiever is still at 25 years old, has now been made the MD, and they're still not working. I still need more. So maybe it's more money. Maybe it's more people to love me. Maybe it's more relationships. And you can see how these patterns will play out into people's lives, and how that can happen in even what feels like a more functional family environment where there's no obvious trauma.
That's a really good explanation. I certainly can identify with that child that feels very responsible for everybody else's emotions, and also the high achiever child. But that thing about, if somebody's upset, it must be my fault, or it's my job to make that better. And I think there's a lot of people that still feel like, as adults, is that the thing? Is that the case then, that you bring it into your adult roles? And so if there's then someone in your team who's a bit upset because of something else that happened, nothing to do with you, not your fault, you still then feel over responsible and feel like you ought to be fixing it.
Yeah. I mean, at the high level, right, you can be at a social event and feel responsible for the couple that you've sensed deeply are having an argument over in that corner and you've not even had a conversation with them, right? So if that's happening at that level, and that's not far-fetched what I'm saying there, then if it's happening within your team, and I'm like that, right? So it's very easy for me to talk about this. I can become over responsible. I say, I stop realizing where my body finishes and yours starts. So if you come in with a deep emotion and a struggle going on, I need to be able to separate myself from you. I need to be constantly reminding myself what Rachel's feeling is not mine to carry. I might be able to hold space. We say hold space because I witness it. I create a space where you feel safe to explore it, but I should never be taking it on, ever. And the moment I start to feel your emotions, I've broke my boundary. And so when you're somebody that's like that, a high feeler, over responsible for other people's emotions, you can almost feel resentful for people that say, oh, I let them have that. That doesn't affect me, because they're clear boundaried. But to me, that can sometimes feel like they're rude. Yeah, because I'm so used to being in tune and then taking responsibility. Now, just quickly to say this, because this is important. My problem is not that I sense that how you're feeling. That in and of itself is a gift. The problem is that I've learned that I then become responsible for it the moment that I sense it. And that's where the boundary has to change, right? That's where I need to go through this period, long periods. Actually, it can take a long time in my life to get to a stage where I know at the end of the conversation with you, I've held space and then I'm done. There's no good me taking your feeling with me. And that at the beginning feels horrible. I feel like I'm being nasty, right? I feel like I'm letting you down because I'm leaving you with it. And so when we talk about burnout, when we talk about overwhelm, when we talk about the scenarios that you're talking about, not just within your team, but with people coming into your practice, and you're picking up what they're feeling, and then you're not being able to hold space. You're not even given time to feel like you can adequately hold space. So then you're carrying all of this stuff in your body. And sometimes when your only coping mechanism is work, you get in this cycle of, I'm working even harder because now I'm carrying half of my team's emotions. I'm carrying half of the people I interact with on a day-to-day basis. It's all in my body. I feel desperately overwhelmed. And my only coping mechanism is work. So now I've got the laptop out and I'm doing work emails when I'm at home, and that cycle then continues and we're never freeing ourselves.
Gosh, Josh, you've just described, I would say 99% of our listeners and me, absolutely, absolutely perfectly. So how do you know, and what does it feel like in your body when you're responding like that because you're back in that childhood role of trying to fix other people's emotions and take it on, or when you're just being an empathetic professional?
It starts, and we have to go a little bit back here, but it starts in understanding what we're feeling. And I say Western culture because it's the only culture I know, we over rationalize everything and it becomes our coping mechanism, right? So when we feel sad as children, we don't often have an opportunity to sit and be sad and be like, oh, this is sadness. Let's let it come. Oh, you feel sad? Let's sit down. Let's cry together. That's normal, right? That's a normal emotion. We rationalize it. Oh, you feel sad? Don't worry. You don't have to feel sad because you've got a great house and you go to a good school or whatever. So we rationalize it, we minimize it, and we put it down. And then so what happens is we never go into our bodies. And the quickest way you can do this is ask somebody how they're feeling. Say, how do you feel? They won't describe how they're feeling. They'll give you a rational answer. Oh, I'm busy. There's lots going on. No. But how do you feel? Oh, I feel a bit annoyed that I've got loads going on. And again, that's a description. If you say to somebody, tell me how you feel in your body, and you watch people panic because they go, oh no, I don't want to do that. Now you've taken my defense of using my head to describe what I'm feeling. So we're really not very equipped to know what we're feeling. Once we know what we're feeling, I can finish work and be driving home and think, I'm going to get out of my head, going to put some calm music on, I'm going to come into my body, and I might cry in the car on the way home, right? And people might think, oh my God, he's crying in the car. Well, actually, that's great. I'm releasing. I've taken on a lot of stuff today. I'm releasing it. I'm letting it go. So in order for us to know when we're being empathetic and know when we're overtaking on everybody's emotions, we have to first know our bodies. And most of us are so up in our heads, we don't even know what's going on in our body. And if you are not on a daily basis, creating at least 2 minutes, that's all, to drop down into your body and realize what you're feeling, you have absolutely no chance of knowing when you're being over empathetic and when you're actually just being empathetic. So once you know your body and I know what I'm feeling, I can come into work intentionally. Okay. So when I go into work, I can check in, and this isn't a long process. I can do this on the train. I can do this as I walk out the door, check in, what's going on. Okay. I had that thing with my partner last night. That's going on. I know that I'm carrying a little bit of that. That's mine. Okay, good. The kids I'm worried about, my daughter's exams, and okay, I know that. So I know what's going on in my body. So then when I start to interact with people, if I'm sitting down with you and you start to tell me, oh, you've got this thing going on at home, I'm clear on my body. I'm like, okay, I am feeling that this is heavy for you. And I'm constantly in my mind remembering, heavy for you. I can hold space for this. We can create a space. We can explore this. I'm with you, but I know what I'm feeling in my body. And so when you give me more feeling, I can stop it at source. This is never mine to feel. Empathy, true empathy, boundaried empathy is creating a space where you feel safe to bring that out into the open. And I don't need to carry it. The only person's emotions I believe anybody should hold is your children's. The moment you're holding anyone else's, you've gone past the boundary. And when you go past that boundary, by the way, you're not only hurting yourself, you're doing the other person a disservice too. Because once you take the emotion on as your own, you're going to respond to them as if you're feeling it. And you can't respond to them in the way that they need when you're feeling it, because you're not them. And actually, you'll start to get to a place of what is, if you pull everything back, arrogance. And you start fixing. And you start saying, I think you should do this. And I think you should do that. And how arrogant of me to believe I have any idea of what's good and what's bad for you. And that's because I've taken your emotion on. And now I'm trying to fix myself, trying to make myself feel better because I'm carrying your emotion.
Wow. When you frame it like that, Josh, that is so powerful. Like fixing people is arrogance. Taking on their emotions is arrogance, thinking that we either can fix them or that we know what to do. But boundaries are really, really hard, particularly for people who are over responsible, feel they need to fix people. And the problem is, I guess, in medicine, we are trained to fix people. I mean, literally our job description, right? You go to your doctor, they fix it. And we do a lot of stuff around boundaries. And even if you know what a boundary is, which I'm not sure everybody does, so I'd love to hear your definition of it, we still feel really unable to set it. So firstly, can you tell me what would your definition of a boundary be? And then secondly, why does it feel not just uncomfortable, but actually unsafe for us to set boundaries when we're feeling this real over responsibility for everybody?
Yeah. I think the unsafety, by the way, comes from a misunderstanding in ourselves of exactly what a boundary is. The safest you can make anybody feel is when you're boundaried, because we don't get all sort of enmeshed with each other. The best way I can define a boundary is to describe how you can reach a place where you have boundaries, right? And I say that you should, in any scenario, you should get clear about your rights in any situation. So like within a practice, like if somebody is seeing a patient, and I can't pretend to know from experience of what that's like, but I can start to get my rights, right? I have the right to not take home somebody's emotional turmoil from their home, right? I have the right to remain free from any distress that I experience here. And then once you have to get clear on those rights, and then you couple them with the ethics of wherever you are as well. And once you've got those two down, the rights and the ethics of where you are, then you can be clear and boundaried. And when you're clear and boundaried, if you think about a boundary of a country, it's like a clear line. This is where we are, right? So then when we have those emotionally, you will present them to somebody and they will be able to then feel safe within the boundaries that are there. If I go into a scenario unboundaried, I am open to you, give me everything, right? Then that person gives me everything. And then some of them, and this all goes on subconsciously, right? And I don't want it to sound too sort of woo-woo, but if I'm completely open and unboundaried in the way that I approach you, but deflect some of the stuff, so I look like I'm there ready to give you a metaphoric hug, and then you reach for that hug, but I turn it away, it's all very unsafe. If I'm much clearer and I'm much more concise with those boundaries, here's the parameters of what we can act in. It's like giving a child, you can do whatever you want in this room, play with any toy you want, go be free. If I don't give them the boundaries and the door's left open and I say, do what you want, and then they're running out and I'm telling them off for running out the door, I didn't create that safety at the beginning. So once we know our rights, we can then vocalize some of them, but also be boundaried in how we approach somebody energetically. And I know we live in a very materialistic society that if you can't see it and it can't be measured, then it doesn't exist. But I think anybody with any level of sensitivity knows when we enter into a relationship of any kind with somebody, there is this kind of energetic connection that happens too.
For doctors and other healthcare professionals and other people in high stress, high stakes jobs, there isn't that agreed boundary in the first place. Like a GP's job is like anything. People could come and expect them to take on anything, really. And then we feel guilty if we don't take on anything. Obviously, we can't take on everything, but it's expected. And as team leaders as well, we haven't taken the time to define, this is where my responsibility for other people ends and this is where theirs starts. Either because we just haven't got any job descriptions or anything like that. I think job description is very narrow anyway, but we've just been groomed, actually, and I use the word grooming intentionally, to feel that everything is our responsibility. As a doctor, I remember when I was a junior doctor on the wards, if someone didn't want to do that thing, I got bleat to do it. And I felt like I didn't have any right to say no.
Yeah.
And I think that probably goes back to childhood as well. You are just expected, and then this expectation follows you in. And so then saying no, you weren't even asked in the first place. It was just expected. So I think it's the expectations that we haven't got our heads around, and there's just no boundaries there. So then then how do you set boundaries when there's no clear expectations out there? We expect everything of ourselves. And we feel so guilty when we disappoint people.
When you disappoint who?
Team members, patients. I think actually we feel worse about disappointing team members, perhaps. Patients, there are some things that we have to disappoint patients. We can't control waiting lists, for example. We can't control funding that's not there, so we do get used to it. We can't control if you have to break bad news to a patient. That's horrible to do, but actually it's not our fault that they might only have a few weeks to live. It's horrible telling them that, but it's not our actions that have disappointed them, if you see what I mean. And I think that's what we find so hard, is when we could do something, we could take on that work for someone, we could do that, but we don't have capacity. And then we have to say no or give it back when it's already landed on us. And that feels like a total abdication of professional responsibility, which then I guess goes back into the stories of you're only as good as what you do, you're only successful if you achieve. And I think in healthcare, you're only successful if everybody loves you.
Yeah.
If you please everybody all of the time.
Yeah. And I think there's look, we're sort of getting into the sort of systemic issues within within that career path. But also, like, there's a lot here around boundaries within any system. And the one thing that I would say to people is that we think that holding our emotions in is controlling them. But when we hold our emotions in, they're controlling us. And what most people do, by the way, and this is definitely most people, is you end up being the best possible version of yourself that you can in your day-to-day work in life. And you bring the worst possible version of yourself home to the people that you care about the most. And that is a breeding ground for resentment, either towards your family or towards your work, because you will have a sense that your career is causing your marriage struggles, which is true, but not the whole picture. Yeah.
I 100% agree with that. And we can see that in doctors where they'll protect their performance at work, even when they're burning out in every other part of their life, because the work matters and the work will always matter. And there will always be someone at risk and someone who needs helping and someone that needs more of you than you can offer. But we feel so guilty. We feel so guilty when we disappoint someone or when we have to say no, even if it was an unreasonable request in the first place. Is that childhood conditioning or is that just the human state?
Can you describe what you mean when you say you feel guilty?
Okay, so if somebody rocks up, just give an example from my own practice as a GP. You're on call, the phones have gone over, the practice isn't actually open yet, but someone turns up at the practice. They've got a medical condition. It's not urgent. It could be seen the next day, but they've got small children with them and they can't afford the bus fare. And they say, oh, can't the doctor just see me now, please? And you're absolutely dead on your feet. And the receptionist says, oh, they're here. And, they haven't got much money. And she's crying at the desk. Please, will you just see them? And to say no feels really mean, but actually it's not urgent. Nobody's going to come to harm. But you're saying no, you're making making things difficult for the receptionist. You want to be a nice doctor, a good doctor. So you probably end up seeing them and absolutely resenting it. You're knackered, you're not giving your best anyway, but it's the guilt that's driving the yes.
And what does it feel like, though, when you're guilty? What are you feeling in your body? What's the feeling?
It's like a constriction and like a feeling of trap that I don't want to do this, but I ought to and I should.
And why should you?
Because their need is greater than my need, often is what we tell ourselves.
So that patient, that their need is greater than your need. So what is your need in that moment? What's your basic need in that moment?
To stop work, to get home, to rest.
Yeah. Can you remember the first time you ever placed somebody's needs above yours?
That's a good question. When you were growing up, of course, your parents' needs often came much, before you. Always, actually.
Exactly. Yeah. So I don't need you to give me a full answer, but you can see when you ask me the question of like, could that be childhood? In that moment, right, when we're feeling highly pressured by a situation that we could easily describe as the right thing to do to be a good person would be to see the patient, right? It's very easy for us to tell ourselves that narrative. We could actually be being driven by a childlike state. We could have gone into that child version of ourselves where we were desperately trying to get one of our parents or somebody in the house to see us when they were busy, to put our needs first. And so as a child, when I'm trying to gain attachment from my parent, so often I will put my parents' needs first because that's how I get attachment from them, because they're busy. And so, like, I'm oversimplifying this because I don't want it to feel pointy towards anyone's like story, right? But we can see how in that moment, we're not just being driven by the woman who's crying and doesn't have bus fare. The big driver here is I want to feel needed. And if I don't do that, I'm not going to be needed. And so you can see that's an slight oversimplification, but you can see how we're not being driven by what's happening in the moment. The main driver internally is by something else. Now, if I was like, really strong and firm in like, I know my value, I know my worth, irrespective of anything else, which is not an easy place to be, by the way. Many of us are rarely there. If we're doing a lot of work all of the time, we might be able to feel like we're there. Then we might be able to say to the receptionist, can you tell her she can come back tomorrow at 9 o'clock and there will be doctors here. I have to leave now because I'm done. Notice how that feels in our body. And it doesn't feel good. Yeah. But actually, the more that we get at peace with ourselves, the more we can get comfortable with that. And I think that as a like chronic fixer, chronic people pleaser myself, when I look at the work that I've tried to do, particularly in the last 10 years since I've grown a platform and do a lot of work helping people, I had to go for a real lengthy process of feeling like I was being horrible, getting used to just saying in my day-to-day life, wherever possible, getting used to just saying no. And you can practice these things in your social life, right? It might be an easier place to start, because if somebody says to me, do you want to come to this thing on Saturday? My instant thought is absolutely not. I don't want to. But I might go, yeah, let me chat and I think I'll be there, but I'll drop you a note and And what I'm trying to do is say no, but I don't want to say no. So get much better at going, no, thank you. I don't fancy it Saturday. What you will notice is that most of society lives in that people-pleasing fashion, because people will be a little bit like, at first, like, what? But then you start to realize the more and more you get better at it, the more people are almost fascinated by your ability to go, no, that's not for me. Thank you, though. And then you start to gain this level of this new kind of respect and safety from people, because they know where you're at. And if you became the doctor who really gives it your all in the time you are at work, the receptionist would probably stop even checking in with you, because they'd be like, Rachel won't do it. It's Rachel. She won't do it. But our fear then becomes, oh, the receptionist won't like me then. She'll think I'm horrible. But the receptionist knows you. They know how hard you work, how much heart you put into it. And they just know that Rachel puts her heart into it all day. And when she's done, she's done. But actually, I really respect that. That's what people will say. But our fear is that receptionist will be, Rachel's horrible. There was a crying woman. Actually, people respect it in the end. And we get that underlying desire and want for respect actually comes when we're able to do that.
It's really fascinating, Josh. Part of me saying, though, actually is not so much about what the receptionist thinks about us, it's what we think about ourselves.
Yeah.
And I think that's the problem with doctors. We beat ourselves up so much. And then say, let's take it a step further. That patient then puts in a complaint about you and says, that doctor, I had an emergency. And you're like, at the time I judged it not to be an emergency. And you're like, oh, I should have just seen it. It would have been easier, because complaints are a freaking nightmare. And we've just been doing lots of webinars about how to manage yourself through complaints, because that is something that completely floors doctors. I didn't do the right thing. I wasn't good. It's this thing about being good as well. And it's hard.
Look, we go into our professions for lots of different reasons. I'm not pretending the only reason you go to be a doctor is because you want to be good. But it certainly lends itself to that, right? It lends itself to being a fixer, being a pleaser, being the one that does all of those things. So we need to have a knowing that of who we are and what drives us. And look, that moment that we talked about, that scenario that we've created, like a great question you can ask yourself in that moment is, who have I become? And where's my answer coming from? So at home time, I'm just about to go home. Am I Josh the dad who promised his kids he would come home and eat dinner with them? Am I Josh the doctor who is seeing that there's this patient that's got no bus money home? Or perhaps am I Josh the child who's just trying to get his needs met? And so if I'm Josh the dad, right? And then out of those three, by the way, who do I want to be? If I want to be Josh the dad, I go, okay, I can be Josh the dad. Let me think. I don't think it's an emergency. That's my actual decision, my actual belief. Let me tend to the child part of me. I can remind them, yeah, no, you're cool, you're needed, you're wanted, you're loved. I love you, right? You've got loving people. And I'm going to go home and have dinner with the kids today. And so we get to see all of the versions of ourselves that are showing up and not try and push them all away, but go, who have I become? Ultimately, in that stage, I've probably become the strongest part of me is that childlike part. I don't want to make this judgment from the childlike part of myself. Let me come into myself and let me see the parts that are coming up here, the childlike part of myself, the professional part, who I truly am, which is the person I am when I'm in the home, I hope. And then I make the decision from that space. And we make so many decisions from our childlike state.
And when you talk about parts, what are you talking about? What do you mean?
Look, there's a guy called Richard Schwartz who has something called internal family systems. Now, look, to be clear, I am a huge fan of it. I've done lots of therapy with an IFS therapist myself. I'm not trained in it or anything like that. But for me, understanding the different parts of myself that show up on a day-to-day basis has single-handedly, of all of the work that I've done on myself, been the most revolutionary, to have an understanding that these different parts of myself show up. And it makes that question of who have I become the most powerful question that I can ask myself. Because what you start to realize is that we have all these different versions of ourselves that show up. And to give you a couple of really sort of obvious examples, I really like football, right? I go and watch a lot of football. I go with my daughter now, who is also obsessed with football. But I find sometimes when I go to football and maybe we go to the pub next to the ground before, I'm different. I pump my chest out a little bit. I get a little bit of a swagger. Maybe I swear a bit more than I normally would and talk about the good old days that never really existed, right? And what I know and recognize now through work on myself is that what's happening in those moments is I get a bit scared. Internally, I'm scared around lots of men, many of whom are similar characters to what my dad was. And so my way of protecting myself is to become that version of myself. If I can see that and understand that and go, who have I become? Oh, I've become that sort of tough guy version. There's great clues in there. Okay, you're scared. That's cool. We can let that person be there, that version of myself, and it can be okay, but I'm not going to let it run the show because I'm aware it's there. Another example, when I first started doing corporate work and going in delivering sessions, I noticed that I would start to pronounce my T's a lot more and talk about literature that I might not have even read. And so why am I doing that? Oh, what's happening here is I don't feel like I'm quite good enough to be here. And so a version of myself has taken over to try and make myself acceptable, to try and make myself fit in. And so the more that you start to realize that these different parts, those are like protector parts that come up, you'll realize that you've got these other parts that in IFS they call sort of exiled parts, which is those childlike parts of myself. And when you start to do some work around these and realize all of these different parts, you start to realize that we're often acting from a different version of ourselves that's not fake. It's a version of ourselves that is there to protect us. And the more we get to know them, the more we can make better decisions from understanding who we are.
So the idea is that you just identify what part has come up.
Yeah.
And then what do you do once you've identified that part?
Yeah. The key thing is try to get to understand what their positive intent is.
Okay.
In simplified version. Like when I talk about that tough guy that comes up at football, what's he trying to do? He's trying to keep me safe because I'm scared. Yeah. So you might have a version of yourself, the high achiever, successful one, the perfect doctor, right? If the perfect doctor version of yourself comes in when that patient is crying and hasn't got any bus money, what are they worried about? The perfect doctor version of yourself might be that one that thinks that you're not good enough. So what they think is if I turn that patient away, I'm not good enough. And when you realize that you're acting from a place of I'm not good enough, you can start to settle that high achieving doctor version of yourself and be like, it's okay. Remind them we're good enough. We've got lots of love in our lives. And our value is not dependent on what we do for this one patient who's turned up at a time that they shouldn't have. And so we can make a much more informed decision because we can see the positive intent. We can see that the doctor version of ourselves is desperately trying to make us good enough. We don't just go, shut up, I'm not going to listen to that version of myself. We can help settle that version of ourselves and then make a more informed decision from a much more self-centered place. Yeah.
Is that what you mean when, and I've heard people say like when the inner child shows up? Are we referring to the child there from like years ago that was just desperately trying to make their parents happy, or it could be anything that this inner child was trying to do, depending on what your childhood was like?
Yeah, exactly. I think whenever we go into a place that feels like erratic, it feels disproportionate to the scenario that's going on, there's a good chance that we may have gone into a childlike state. And then our actions become childlike, as obvious as that sounds, right? And I think for most of us, this will show up most strongly in our relationships. Within our personal relationships, our inner child will come out a lot more. And learning to connect with that innermost part of ourselves is some of the deepest work that we can do. And we can start to realize when these protector parts are coming to try and keep that part of us safe so we don't feel exposed. The closer we are with that, the more that we can make those inner child parts of ourselves feel safe, the more we're able to turn up in the version of ourselves that we truly are. The self, as we might call it, yeah.
How can you help people make sense of what happened in the past without going into like real victimhood or blaming other people? Because I think most people's parents were trying to do their best in it, and they've probably been wounded themselves and all that stuff.
Mm-hmm. I think the first thing to understand is that to discuss with people, or whether it's a therapist or close people that you're having discussions with, to discuss where you felt like you were let down as a child or where you were negatively impacted is not a betrayal. It's really important to understand that. Like, none of us make it out of childhood unscathed. But we shouldn't prevent our right to do some work around that stuff through fear that we're betraying our parents just for admitting where they might have let us down. And then actually, the work starts by taking responsibility and accountability for who I am today. And that's the reality. We don't actually, in a lot of cases, we don't actually have to go back and drag up, oh, this stems from that moment where my mum looked at me wrong. But we can hypothesize, right? You can hypothesize so you can look back at your life and go, oh, that when I was 2, my mum and dad went through that tragedy. Or I know when I was 2, my dad lost his job and we had to move across town. I don't remember it being traumatic, but I can hypothesize that for the next 2 years, life was a struggle at home. And maybe I felt that struggle and started to feel responsible. And that kind of makes sense now that I'm overly responsible in times of, or when something bad is happening in my life. So I don't think we always have to go back and drag it all up. But what we can do is be like, who am I today? Why have I become this version of myself? And how do I become accountable in this moment? And sometimes that just means hypothesizing or being able to just look honestly at some of the experiences that you had when you were a child. I do a lot of work with people that have experienced the other end of the spectrum, where they really have had abusive parents. That's different. Then I think you really do need to first notice where you truly were a victim, and that's the first step to freedom. But the main pool of people that you're talking about, I think we all grow up, I would say, with some level of dysfunction. And some level of that will impact us negatively. I will have done the same to my kids. It's hard to admit that people say give your children a childhood that they won't need to heal from. I say try and make sure that when your kids want to do some work, if they feel they need to come to you, then be approachable. The truth is, I think, and this might be slightly controversial, we don't have a society that's built around nurturing children. I don't know if we ever did, but we certainly don't now. We live in a society, it's very driven. Get both parents back to work as quickly as we possibly can. And so it's hard. There's going to be, we live in insular places now. Lots of us don't live anywhere near family. So lots of people live in one parent families, right? But if you live in a 2-parent family household, even then, there's going to be lots of times when both parents aren't emotionally available. And you might not live near anyone else who can be emotionally available for them. So there may be periods of time where most kids are going to go without an emotionally available adult, because it won't be a teacher, right? Because they're too busy with academic pressure.
And that was something I wanted to ask you about, because as you were saying about, the only person that you should be absorbing emotions from are their children. I'm paraphrasing. Are your children. What I notice in a lot of doctors, a lot of our listeners, is that we're not looking after our own needs at home either. But then we're talking about the fact that a lot of people have been damaged by parents putting their own needs first. And obviously, I don't want to damage my children, but I do have needs at home for rest and not endlessly being available and not endlessly just being the kitchen slave and being seen for myself. So how does one be a good parent and model meeting your own needs whilst also enabling the children to meet their needs as well? Because sometimes that can feel like it's like a seesaw. It's like me or them.
Yeah, I think you make a really good point, right? And like I always say that if you try to be something for everyone, you end up being nothing for nobody, right? All of the time. And so sometimes that, like, real clear, you're better off with your kids in the evening going, right, 5:30 till 6:30 or whatever time it is. I'm with you fully. What do you want to do? We've got an hour. Let's do it. I'm going to leave the laptop and the phone in another room. Because what we tend to do, and I give this example, I'll try and give it very quickly. We're a little bit younger, when they were like 3 or 4, I'd be like, what do you want to do? What do you want to do? They're like, oh, can we watch Peppa Pig? So we put Peppa Pig on, right? And I sit next to them. And after a little while, because I've not fully rested into what we're doing, I get my phone out, right? And I'm looking at my work emails.
Well, you might just not be fully into Peppa Pig. It's boring.
Right, so Peppa Pig is boring, right? But because I've not been fully intentional that, like, this is what the kids want, I get my phone out, yeah? I start looking at my work emails. My daughter's too young to go, Dad, I want to watch Peppa Pig, and I can tell you're not here, yeah? So she starts like climbing on me, and then I go, come on, get off me, get off, right? And then in the end, I go, listen, if you don't want to watch Peppa Pig, I'll turn it off. And in that moment, again, I've taught my kid, your needs don't matter, and don't bring them to me, because if they do, I'll threaten you with the very thing that you're trying to get. And so, like, that being intentional becomes absolutely vital. Not always easy. Again, when we talk about 1-parent families, it gets even harder, right? But being intentional with the time that we have with our children and with ourselves becomes vital. And I think that if you can, even if it's half an hour with the kids, where you go, as crap as Peppa Pig is, right? Or like, you want to play Uno again, right? But you go, you know what? And you'll feel better about yourself because you've had half an hour fully locked in with the kids, rather than floating about with your laptop or your phone in your hand, or, yeah, come on, show me that thing you want to show me. And they clearly know you're not even paying attention. And there's nothing worse as a parent, is there? I've had it with my kids where they say to me, you're not even listening, because they've asked me a question and I've not answered it because I'm not listening. I'm over here.
Yeah, I'm just checking this. All right, wait a minute.
Yeah. And sometimes you got to lock in. Just lock in half an hour. I might only have half an hour tonight with the kids, but let me go and give them half an hour fully.
We talk about this not to blame anyone, not to make people feel guilty, but just to empower people, I think. And obviously you talked about therapy, and I'm a big fan of therapy. I think it's really important. But what does healing look like for busy adults who who aren't in therapy, maybe don't feel they have the time or the headspace at the moment? How can they start to heal from all of this?
You know what I think? The greatest sort of tip I'm going to give you here is the ability to revisit. Now, what I mean by that is it lends itself to what you just said, which is we're not trying to blame anyone here. We're not trying to make anyone feel bad. It's like when you're busy, you're going to mess up all of the time. And can you find moments to get intentional and then just revisit the people that matter? Go to my kids and say, you know what, yesterday, I'm sorry, last night, I was fully up in my head. I was busy with work, and I just want you to know it was nothing to do with you. And I'd love to have half an hour watching bloody Peppa Pig with you today. But that ability to really revisit intentionally, I think, is the greatest gift that we can give ourselves. Because what most of us do is we grit our teeth, clench our fist, and hope that tomorrow will get easier. And we just got to break that. You break that on the commute to work, or you break it on the commute home. You relax your jaw, and as woo-woo as this might sound, you relax your jaw, unclench your fists, take a breath. What am I feeling? All right, it's been a busy day. How am I going to walk in the door today? What decision am I going to make when I walk in the door? And that's it. Don't make it any more complex than that, because if you do, you stop doing it. Find a bit of intention, and then know that revisiting is the greatest gift, because getting it right first time doesn't happen very often.
Yeah, I think that's an important message, because there's a lot of doctors out there thinking, because I've always been doing it like this, I can't change. I can't suddenly start putting boundaries or saying no. And you absolutely can. And so those two questions, what did I struggle with last week? And what am I worried about going forward? So what's happened in the past? What am I ruminating on? What am I pre-living? And just actually talking about it is quite healing in itself.
It's one of the most simple things, but one of the most important things that we forget. And I encourage everybody listening to just think, when was the last time you had a proper vent? Because you should be having at least one a week. And most people haven't had one in the last year, not a proper one. And an outburst doesn't count. When the lid's blown off and you've had an outburst, that doesn't count, because that means you've gone beyond. It's about regularly untangling, speaking, untangling. Yeah.
Yeah. And is it useful to do that with a friend who's not in your workplace and not your partner?
100%. Yeah. 100%. And by the way, the key thing is not fixing, not like we all need to be able to, everybody needs to be able to rant about their partner to somebody and say the stuff you're thinking but don't mean. We need to say that about everyone in our life, that we're thinking but don't mean. Because if we think them and don't say them, we sometimes can think them so much that we start to think we mean them too. And when you go, like, I might be talking about my partner and like, she does this, and then it drives me mad. And then you say it, and then you go back to just loving them and thinking, oh, I've said it now. But if you ruminate on it, then 6 weeks later, when there's no milk in the fridge, and you're like, do you know what? 6 weeks ago, and it's because you've never put it down. You've never got it out.
That's so interesting. I think some of us are worried about saying those things that we don't mean, because if we say them out loud, it makes them real. But what you're saying is that if you say them out loud, sometimes it just takes the power out of them, and you realize, oh no, actually,
Yeah. Everybody needs to vent.
Yeah. And if you don't have a friend that can do that with, then the therapist is a really good option as well. And I think, I've had some therapy recently, and it's been absolutely fantastic. Well, firstly, just to validate what I was already thinking, and just to help me unpick stuff. So really important. Well, Josh, in a minute, I'm going to ask you for your 3 top tips for over-responsible people to try and step out of that over-responsibility. But Josh's book is totally brilliant, and it contains a lot of journal questions for you to start to examine what went on for you in the past. And it also contains some breath work, which we haven't even started talking about yet, which is absolutely brilliant. So I would really recommend that to people, particularly if you can put your finger on some things in your background that weren't ideal, and you can recognize that maybe there's been some trauma and some wounding from. So we'll put a link to that in the show notes. Josh, what's it called? Remind me the exact title.
It's Them Not You: How to Break Free from Toxic Parents and Reclaim Your Story.
Love it. Love it. So Josh, if you had 3 top tips for anyone who is over responsible, over fixing, and probably overworking right now, what would they be?
Okay, so look, the first one is going to be become intentional. All right. So, like, in very real forms, release your jaw, unclench your fists, and check in with your body. That's what being intentional really, really means. The second tip that I would give is start to learn where your body ends and other people's starts. That comes to that emotional responsibility stuff that we're talking about. And then the third tip would be community. And community starts with a conversation with at least one other person. But you absolutely need, I don't care how introverted you are, you need space in your life to be able to talk to people about the things that are going on in your life. Yeah.
Great. Thank you. And if people wanted to get hold of you, find out more about your work, where can they go?
My website's joshconnolly.co.uk. That's probably the best place to go, and you can find all of my links to there. I'm Josh_FFW on Instagram, and I create a lot of content there too.
Brilliant. Thank you so much for being with us today. I've absolutely loved the conversation. I've got so many things going around my head, so we'll speak to you again soon, hopefully.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks a lot.